All right, peeps, I'm back with part 2 of episode 8 of this podcast. Now, I got some questions. What does it feel like to watch someone you love go through the battle that you can't fight for them? How do you offer a hand when you feel helpless yourself? Those are the questions we're going to be asking today. Last time we talked about the tools a patient needs to carry on. But what about the person standing right next to them? The ones who show up day in and day out with no compass to guide them. Today, we're going to be building that compass. We're talking to the partners, the parents, the friends, the loved ones who are fighting this battle from a different side. This one's for you. With that being said, go ahead and grab your cup of coffee because I'm going to be pouring some chronic brew. Cheers.
You are now tuned into the Chronic Brew Podcast with Mr. Cooley. Sharing stories, inspiring others.
Welcome back to The Brew. In part 1, we talked about the patient's toolbox, the strategies they can use to navigate the mental and emotional battles of chronic illness. But no one should have to fight this fight alone. For those of you who are partners, parents, children, or even friends of someone with chronic illness, this part of the episode is for you. Think of it as your compass, a guide to help you be the best support you can be. When we talk about chronic illness, the focus is always on the patient. But there is a whole other side to the story, a silent partner in the fight, and that part is the caregiver. I just have to say this, man. If you are a caregiver, I know it's not easy, but you are such a superhero. Because to me, a caregiver is more than just a person. Okay, they are a co-pilot, a co-conspirator, and a teammate. A caregiver could be a spouse, could be a parent, a child, or a friend who's willing to step in the chaos of a chronic illness to help navigate the journey. They are the people who hold the patient's emotional compass steady, and oftentimes, their own emotions are being tested. They are the ones who show up day after day and not out of obligation, but out of love. The job of a caregiver is a dynamic, multifaceted one, typically falling into like 3 categories. You got the practical role, you have the emotional role, and even the advocate role. Like these 3 things are super pivotal. Let's go ahead and start with the practical role. This is the hands-on part of the job. It includes managing the day-to-day logistics of the illness. A caregiver coordinates hospital appointments, tracks medications, organizes medical records, and handles transportation. For someone with CKD, they might also be responsible for, tasks like preparing kidney-friendly meals, ensuring fluid restrictions are followed, and helping with household chores when the patient is too fatigued. And then you got the emotional role. This is arguably the most crucial part of the job, okay? The caregiver acts as a constant source of emotional support and validation. Sometimes, I'm be honest, let me not get ahead of myself here. They are the ones who listen, without judgment. That whole quote online, we listen but we don't judge, right? They listen without judgment. They offer a shoulder to cry on and provide a sense of normalcy in the midst of a life turned upside down. They are a source of comfort when the fear and anger and sadness of all of the illness becomes overwhelming. And then you have the infamous advocate's role. When a patient is too tired or overwhelmed to speak up for themselves, that's when a caregiver becomes their voice. They step in. This probably includes, talking to doctors, questioning a treatment plan, dealing with insurance companies, you know how that goes sometimes, and even advocating for the patient's needs within the healthcare system. A caregiver often becomes a medical expert and like a fierce protector, like mama bear, if you will, or daddy bear, whatever you want to call it, right? They become fierce with it because this is their loved one. They want to ensure that their loved one gets the best care that they deserve. All right? The role of a caregiver is nothing short of vital. Their support can directly impact the patient's physical and mental health. Like, that is facts. If, what's great is this morning, I was actually talking with my wife. And one thing that we came to agree upon is that, a caregiver's ability to fight for the person recovering determines how well the patient fights to live. A dedicated caregiver reduces the patient's stress, improves their adherence to treatment plans, and significantly enhances their overall quality of life. They're the ones who see the patient beyond their illness, helping them to manage a sense of identity and purpose. Because a lot of times, I'm not even going to lie to you guys, chronic illness kind of depletes or can contribute to depleting your sense of identity or purpose. It makes you feel like you're nothing anymore. And a lot of times, that's just the mental side of the fight of having chronic illness. But I want to also stress this. Their role is also important for themselves. Caregiving is a journey that builds incredible resilience, okay? It depends on relationship, fostering empathy, and gives a person a profound sense of purpose. It is a sacrifice, yes, but it's also a powerful testament to the strength of love and the human spirit, guys. There are a few solid reasons why people walk gingerly around the topic and don't fully understand the importance of being a caregiver and walking in that role properly. It's not always a lack of empathy. Often it's a lack of lived experience. If you haven't lived it, you wouldn't know how to walk it. Walk the walk, talk the talk kind of deal, if you will. So, also, let me not go there. There's one piece to it, three pieces to it. There's a discomfort with the illness. Most people don't want, to confront their own vulnerability or fragility, right? They don't want to show they're weak about the chronic illness, okay? Just so you know, chronic illness, particularly one like CKD that has no cure, forces them to face a harsh reality that they'd rather not think about it. Ever hear that before? It's easier to avoid the topic than to sit with that discomfort. And then you got the fear of saying the wrong thing. People often feel completely out of their depth. They worry about anything they say will sound, trite, dismissive, insensitive. The fear of making a mistake often leads to silence or vague, platitudes like, I hope you feel better soon. You don't look bad today. And then you got the invisibleness, the blind spots. Many chronic illnesses have no outward symptoms. If a person looks fine, others assume they are fine. They can't see the chronic fatigue, the pain, the mental fog. Because they can't see the patient's struggles, they can't possibly grab the monumental effort required of a caregiver. This goes beyond, simple discomfort and speaks to a societal blind spot. I really think that there's some issues with how we portray the caregiver-patient role that people are not really looking at. And it's not necessarily the people's fault. I think as a society, like I said, there's some things that we're definitely missing. Caregiving almost seems like it's a given. Caregiving being a given. I think that's totally wrong. We're conditioned to believe that caregiving for a loved one is just an act of love or a natural family duty. Like I said, society doesn't recognize it's a full-time job with significant physical and mental and even financial demands. It's expected because, it's expected. Its importance is often overlooked. And then you have the focus on the patient all the time. Let me just say this. I know that being a patient, you want the world to give you a hug. You want the world to be there for you. You want the world to almost not baby you, but just to make sure they remember who you are in the midst of your chaos, right? But you have to remember there's someone also there who's going through it with you. And a lot of times, because they have their strength, and I know you're going through your piece, they're helping you to recover. So a lot of times people don't even realize the amount of strength it takes for that person to come into your life and be there day by day out of love and try to make sure that you're recuperating right, you're getting the strength that you need. Literally, you're relying on that caregiver. The whole entire healthcare system, the media and public awareness campaigns are built around the patient. If you ever go to the hospital, all you see is the patient on the bed, smiling and everybody's taking care of them. Focus is on them. We're here about the patient's diagnosis. We hear about the diagnosis, their treatment, and their recovery. The narrative of the caregiver, the person managing the appointments, coordinating the medication, and providing constant emotional support, that part is rarely told. And that's where the caregiver's role becomes super invisible. And then you got the caregiver's own silence. Many caregivers don't talk about their struggles because they don't want to seem, ungrateful or complain. They put on a brave face. And that silence reinforces the public's misconception. that caregiving is easy, or that they are managing just fine. A lot of time caregivers, they don't want to talk about how they're really feeling because they don't want the patient to feel like they are a burden, or they feel, if they talk about it, the patient's going to, want to give up or get up and force themselves to be better when they really can't. Like, it's almost like they don't want to guilt trip the patient into doing something that could actually hurt them. And even that in of itself is damaging, not just to the patient, but to the caregiver. I'm thankful that I have this here platform where I can allow, both patient and caregiver to kind of share their viewpoints so that other people can understand this, because it's not being told when you look at, TV or, different shows with hospitals. It's not being told. Doctors aren't talking about that, and to me, honestly, I believe that caregivers, they're literally the extension of the hospital. Can you imagine? When a patient goes home for outpatient, they trust that the caregiver is going to do that. They're going to do their job. You're literally like an extension of the hospital, because you got to bring that patient back to the hospital. You got to bring them back to do the appointments. You got to drive them. You got to make sure they're good. And when they do the follow-ups, the caregiver, like I said, is literally an extension of the doctors that are working in the hospital. And I think they should have the same level of respect and reverence, just as for the patient's care. Now that I've said a mouthful, I hope some of you guys are still with me here. I'm sure there's some people out there who are like, man, Mr. Cool Beans, I just don't know, what to do, or how do I start, or I want to be a caregiver. I want to be there to show support. I want to be that friend, but I just don't know the things to do to make sure that they feel comfortable with me trying to help them, or trying to be there for them and help them feel comfortable in the midst of their chaos. Well, this is where, this is the part of the show where we start building that compass, right? So let's go ahead and start. When you love someone who is hurting, our first and most powerful instinct is to try to fix it off the rip. We want to make the pain go away, to offer a solution, those unsolicited advices, to say something that will bring back their smile. But with chronic illness, you can't always fix it. And in those moments, the best thing you can do is to simply validate their reality. I think trivializing a person's feelings, even when it's the best intention, can cause more harm than good. When you say, look on the bright side, or it could be worse, what they often hear is, your pain isn't valid. It's kind of like trying to put a tiny bandage on a deep open wound. It doesn't help, and it can make them feel even more isolated. You see, the power of validation is in its simplicity. It's about saying, I see you and I hear you. It's about being a witness to their struggle and not a judge of it. Let's walk through some, little situations that you might encounter with someone with a chronic illness and how you might need to navigate that, right? So, when someone with a chronic illness expresses fatigue or pain, don't say, you just need to get more rest. Okay, that might sound, nice and all that, but it probably doesn't go too far. What I want you to try to say is something like, that sounds absolutely exhausting. I can imagine how tired you must be right now. That might go just a couple more yards further, okay? When someone like me, right, with the food restrictions, don't say, just think about the food that you can have. What I want you to try to say is, man, it must be so frustrating watching everyone else go ahead and eat tomatoes and, drink their orange juice and maybe even have, some Sprite here and there. Just say, like, I'm sorry you have to deal with that. When they're struggling with a difficult emotion, please, 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 for the love of God, okay, do not say, try to stay positive. You know what? They start blinking fast and their thoughts start raging, okay? But what I want you to say something like, I don't know, say, it's okay to feel sad, angry, or scared. Thank you for sharing that with me. I gotta say, I have some folks in my circle who actually have said that to me. Thank you for sharing that with me. I really appreciate you sharing that. And sometimes they'll even say, it's all right to feel sad or angry. You're only human. You're learning what it is to be human. I appreciate that because it definitely validates my emotions at that point. But that try to stay positive stuff, yo, okay, let's move on. All right. So I want you to remember your role in the moments when they feel like this is not to be the fixer. It's to be the safe space. The most powerful words you can offer are, I'm here for you, because in that simple statement, you're validating their reality and reminding them that they are not alone in this. All right, now let's get into the meat and potato of things, okay? When we talk about offering practical support, it's about translating good intentions into meaningful action. For someone battling chronic illness, like for me, CKD, right? The simplest daily task can feel like a marathon sometimes. The fatigue is real, and the mental load of managing the disease can leave you with no energy for anything else. And I bet you some folks are like, so why don't they just ask for help? Often, it's a mix of pride, the fear of being a burden, and sheer mental exhaustion. A person might be so tired that they can't even think of what they need, or they don't want to bother you. This is where you, as a caregiver, can step in and take the lead. Think of practical support as kind of like the backbone of your care. It's the dependable, tangible way you can show up. The sheer number of appointments, medications, and dietary rules sometimes can be overwhelming. You can offer to drive to their doctor's appointments or daily dialysis treatment or whatever appointments they have. The company and the simplest task of taking the burden of driving off their plate can be huge. I know for me, whenever I have to go to like a surgery or a doctor's appointment way out in Tampa and I know it's going to be outpatient or I wake up with no energy in the morning, my wife, she takes over, she drives, she's that for me. Whereas I can drive fast. I'm sorry, honey, I had to put you on blast. I can drive faster than her. She's willing to take me there even if it's, at a moderate speed. I'm not trying to make it seem like she's driving all, getting honked at by people because she drives slow. No, it's just that she takes that burden for me. All right, let me get off this part. You can even offer to help organize their medication. I know for me, I'm pretty strategic on where I keep my medication, how much I take. I keep a mental routine. So my wife doesn't really have to do that for me. But just that simple task can prevent errors and make their daily routine less stressful. Matter of fact, no, my wife does help me with my medication. You know why? Because anytime that we go traveling or anytime we go out of town or something like that, my wife reminds me to take, I have this little circular thing with all the days of the week and I put my medicine in there. If I know what I'm going to take Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, etc. I didn't think of buying that. My wife bought that because she thought about me and the medication that I need to take to continue fighting this thing. Okay? So big ups to my wife. All right? Shout. I know I'm getting brownie points. I don't care. Leave me alone. All right? You can even even what she also does for me too. As far as being a food scout. She researches new, kidney friendly recipes, or even when we go to restaurants, she makes sure they have things that I can actually eat so that I don't feel alone, and trying to figure out what foods, I can't eat this, so I'm not going to eat at all, Those things speaks volumes. And on top of that, my wife, I remember when I got the partial nephrectomy, my wife did a good job of ordering some, partial nephrectomy food, not partial nephrectomy food, but, some renal diet foods after my surgery so that I didn't have to put stress on my kidneys or feel like I had to eat certain things in order, you know what I mean? So my wife, you know what? Anywho, when a patient is home, all right, let's talk about that. When they're home, their energy is often spent on recovery. Going back to that partial nephrectomy, it was a whole 12-week recovery process. I couldn't really lift anything. Energy was shot, and I know on that 12th week, I tried to go biking and I felt the impact of that big time. So I had to come back home, right? But you can help by taking care of the small things that add up. For example, you can offer to pick up groceries or run errands for them. A trip to the store can be incredibly draining for someone with a chronic fatigue. You can even offer to help with laundry. My gosh, laundry, washing dishes, or even taking out the trash. I know for me, I'll be honest, I'm gonna put myself on blast really quick. My biggest thing, I don't know if it's just a guy thing or whatever the case may be, but my biggest thing, if a doctor tells me, hey, look, you can't do X, Y, Z after, your hospital visit, make sure you rest and recover. You know what's going to happen? I'm probably going to be cutting grass, doing some kind of something. And that's not good either. And I think going back to what I was mentioning before, I think that's the element of the pride, not wanting to be a burden to anybody. I just feel like, well, I see it needs to be done. I'm going to get up and do it. Even if I have to manage or watch how much energy I'm exerting, I'm going to try to get it done. When really I should just be following doctor's orders and resting. Okay. So like I said, man, doing the laundry, the dishes, taking up the trash, these small tasks, right? When you're exhausted, it can feel totally impossible. Sometimes practical support isn't just about the physical task alone. People love to harbor, man, I got to get up and, it's not about the physical task. It's about helping them reclaim their sense of normalcy. Instead of asking them to suggest an activity, you can suggest one. Like, let's watch a movie together on the couch. Or how about we go out for a short, slow, and I mean slow, walk outside? Sometimes just sitting in a room together in comfortable silence is the most helpful thing you can do. It shows that, you're there without any expectations. You ever just sat with somebody and was just there to be? And then one person brings up a joke, then that joke becomes laughter, and then that laughter becomes a memory, and then here comes a conversation, and then next thing you know, you realize you both take that deep breath like, that was good. You know what I mean? By offering specific, actionable help, you're not only easing their physical burden, but also you're showing them that you see their struggle and are willing to be an active part of their team. And for this last one, when you love someone with chronic illness, your natural instinct is to care for them. But to be a truly effective caregiver, your love has to be supported by knowledge. I'm sorry, you can't just wing it, alright? The final and most important step in your role is to educate yourself and ask questions. This isn't about becoming a doctor. It's about being a co-pilot who understands the flight plan. When you take the time to learn about the loved one's condition, it reduces your own anxiety and gives you the confidence to be a powerful advocate on their behalf. You don't need to read a medical textbook. Start simple. Ask doctors, during appointments. Don't be afraid to ask, for a plain language explanation. Say stuff like, can you explain that in a way that's easy to understand? It's okay to look them in the eyes and ask that. Look up information on your trusted sites. Like, for me, it would be the National Kidney Foundation. These resources are designed to help patients and caregivers navigate the disease without medical jargon. I'm guilty of this. I remember back when I was in the classroom as a teacher, right? Parents would come in and we would have all of these big old vocabulary words and, trying to describe test scores and assessments and da-da-da-da-da. And the parents were just looking at us like, what? We have to break it down in layman's terms. Shout out to the doctors. Break it down in layman's terms. You don't have to memorize. Also, you don't have to memorize every lab result. But knowing that, knowing the few key numbers, that can mean all the difference. Like for me, for CKD, focusing on my GFR, the glomerular filtration rate. That's a hard word to say. I'm not even gonna lie. That glomerular filtration rate. Got it. I just say GFR. To understand just that, to understand how well the kidneys are working, and then you have the potassium and the creatinine. To understand what, you understand those things to understand what dietary choices, you have to take and what it means to the body. Knowledge is power, guys. That's something, in the 90s, don't waste your mind. A mind is a terrible thing to waste. But it's true. Knowledge is power. My dad always said, education is the key that unlocks every door in life. And I think the same goes to taking care of folks with chronic illnesses. If you take anything philosophical from me, just remember this. Knowledge is power, but a good question is the key that unlocks it. So, here are some questions that you can ask your loved one or on their behalf at their next doctor's appointment. You can ask questions about their symptoms, like, my loved one is experiencing a lot of fatigue. Is that normal, right now? Is that a normal symptom? What can we do to help that? You can ask about their treatment. What is the goal of this medication? What are the side effects, we should look out for? Because we don't want to be caught off guard. You can ask about the future. Like for me, for example, my wife is really good at this. Like, what are some signs that the disease is progressing? And shout out to my nephrologist. He told me some key things to look out for if my kidney disease decides to take a nosedive. And another question for that would be, when should we consider a conversation about dialysis or transplant? All of those questions are valid and can be truly life-changing for the patient that you're taking care of. I think by asking these questions, you're showing your loved one that you are an active and dedicated partner in their care. You are not just a passenger on their journey, you're also that co-pilot. Peeps, we've talked about the separate points of the caregiver's compass. But when they work in tandem, They become the bedrock of a patient's support system. That is what it truly means to be a partner in this fight, and that's the power of the compass. We started talking about validation, the simple but profound act of truly seeing and hearing your loved one's pain without trying to fix it. This isn't just about listening skills. It's about offering an emotional sanctuary. It's about creating a safe space where your loved one can just be real, where their anger, sadness, and frustration are not only welcome, but met with a reassuring nod of understanding. That alone can be more powerful than any medicine or any pill that a doctor can prescribe. We then move to practical support, learning that specific acts of service are often more powerful than 1,000 words. This isn't just about doing tasks. It's about a transfer of energy. Every time you offer to drive to an appointment, pick up groceries, or help with the household chore, you are giving a patient a precious gift, the gift of their own limited energy back. You are telling them, not with words, but with action, that their burden is a shared one. And finally, we just discussed how educating yourself and asking questions can transform your love into an effective form of advocacy. This is your courage in action, guys. It's about stepping up to understand the numbers, the medicine, and the treatment plans so that you can become a fierce and informed partner in every conversation with the medical team. You don't have to be intimidated. Just ask questions. This kind of knowledge is what allows you to fight for your loved ones in the ways they need you to. When you use validation, practical support, and educating others, you are not just a witness to their battle. You become a true, irreplaceable partner in their care. You are telling them, in 1,000 small ways, that they are not fighting this battle alone, and that is a story worth more than words. More than words. Isn't that an 80s song? That song just popped up. Okay, stay focused. All right, peeps, with everything that was shared today, our journey through the Caregiver's Compass, has come to an end, unfortunately. I would love to sit here and keep rambling, but I think you guys got enough. To the caregivers listening, the Shantae Mondesirs, the Donna Slacks, all of you caregivers out there, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being the co-pilots in our fights. The love, support, and courage you show every single day are immeasurable. Never forget that your role is a powerful one. And you are not just helping someone, you are giving them the strength to carry on. To the patients, like myself and many others, please remember that you don't have to carry this alone. There are people who want to be your partners in this fight. Let them be your compass and allow them to show you the way, please. As we end this episode, let's carry the message that no matter what your chronic illness is, and no matter what side of the battle you're on, we're all in this together. Say it with me. We're all in this together. All right? Until next time, peeps, keep brewing up hope and don't miss the next episode where I have a sit-down conversation with an incredible individual whose fight with chronic illness encouraged her to be a beacon of laughter and inspiration in the chronic illness community. Also, be sure to follow myself and the Chronic Brew Podcast on Instagram at MrCoolBeans2889. Thanks for listening. Peace out.